During the last part, I talked to you about Kothamangalam Subbu. That was the last character we discussed about. And we need to continue from that point on. And that is in page 59, unit 6 of Flamingo, right? So Kothamangalam Subbu must have had a lot of disadvantages when he entered Gemini Studios. Now, when you look further, you get a little more analysis of his character, okay? On the contrary, he might have had to face more uncertain and difficult times. That means he must have had worse disadvantages as compared to the office boy of the makeup department. Why? It gives you reasons for that. For that is the reason, because when he began his career, there were no firmly established film producing companies or studios. When he started his career, there was not a single firmly established recording studio or filmmaking studio, and therefore, uh, getting opportunities to enter into the industry itself was very difficult, right? Even in the matter of education. But if you think that maybe he was more educated than this office boy, no. In the matter of education, especially formal education, that is education in a school or a college after that, Subbu couldn't have had an appreciable lead over our boy. Subbu could not have had a greater or even much, an appreciable lead means much more than the other person. Okay, the other person here referring to the office boy of the makeup department. He couldn't have had much greater an advantage than that boy. But by virtue of being born a Brahmin, but there was one advantage which might be considered an advantage, and that is the advantage of being a Brahmin. Many people in Gemini Studios, as well as people in the industry all around, happened to be Brahmins who were successful in life, happened to be Brahmins. So they had contacts. If they had contacts with Gemini Studio, they could easily get him a job there. Maybe that is an advantage. Maybe he's talking about that. Maybe it is not. Let's see a little later. We'll see what he means here. He must have had exposure. Now, how is that an advantage? Being born a Brahmin, he must have had an exposure to more affluent situations. Affluent situations means being richer. He must have been brought up in a wealthier family and people. And also, he must have had contact with a lot of rich people, okay, influential people. He had the ability to look, now, more than that, he had a natural advantage. He had the ability to look cheerful at all times, even having had uh, a hand in a flop film. This man has got a natural optimism that helps him to get friends. He always had work for somebody. Another advantage he had was when people came to him looking for work, he was able to help them get work. He could never do things on his own. Now, that means probably he didn't take any initiative to what do you call do things by himself, or maybe what it means by he always had worked for somebody is that he was a good person who allocates jobs, but he doesn't take up the job by himself and do it himself, right? But his sense of loyalty, the reason given why he never could do things of his own on his own, his sense of loyalty made him identify himself with his principal completely. He never took the role of his boss. Principal here refers to his boss, SS Vasan. Okay, why was he not trying to take the position of the boss? Because he was very loyal to the boss. He didn't want to overtake him, as they say, right? And turn his entire creativity, he used all the creativity that he had to his principal's advantage, to his boss's advantage. He was tailor made for films. Now, what advantages, what skills did he have? He was tailor made for the films. That means he could do everything the film industry required of a person. Here was a man who could be inspired when commanded. Now, he was a kind of person who could be, if you ask him to do something creative, he got the creative energy to be able to do something. He got the points or the ideas to do that something. He was a man who could be inspired when commanded. Here's an example. Okay, and it's in quotation. The rat fights the tigress underwater. The rat fights a tigress underwater and kills her. So this fight is taking place with the rat underwater and the tigress underwater. It's an underwater fight, right? Almost impossible, and kills her. Okay, a rat killing a tigress, almost impossible, but takes pity. And after that, that same rat takes pity on the cubs, on the young ones of the tigress, and tends them loving and looks after them lovingly. I don't know how to do this scene, says the producer. Okay, the producer would say to Subbu. And Subbu would come out with four ways. No, Subbu, unlike other people, when presented with a problem like this, he would not get shocked and not be able to do it. He will come out with four different ideas of how to do this scene. And that's his genius. Four different ways of a rat pouring affection on its victim's offsprings. So it's able to be a what do you call, to show some reaction, some reaction to a situation. The situation is the rat fights the tigress, kills the tigress, finds the cubs, and wants to show affection. That's a situation to the cubs. He would show four different ways of how the rat would show affection. A rat would be much smaller than the cubs. How it would show affection to the four cubs. Okay, he would bring out four different ways of how to do it. Good, would say the producer. In most cases, that's the way that the producer would say, but this producer will not be happy with that. But I'm not sure if it's effective enough. Those four different ways, none of those four ways satisfies him. Usually, the producer is like that. The producer would say, and in a minute, Subbu would come out with 14 more alternatives, and that did not stump him. He immediately came out with 14 more ways of showing the same scene. Filmmaking must have been and was so easy with a man like Subbu around. Now, that's the reason everyone came to him for help. Okay, and that's the reason why he was such a big important person there. Because the problems that people face while they're shooting or while they're making the film, while they're editing, all those things, he seemed to have an answer to all these problems. So he made their work look easy, right? Filmmaking must have been and was so easy with a man like Subbu around. And if ever there was a man who gave direction, if you want to say there is somebody who gave a sense of direction to the Gemini Studios' way of doing things in films, it is because of Kothamangalam Subbu. If there was a man who gave direction and definition, identity to Gemini Studios during its golden years, it was Subbu. Subbu had a separate identity as a poet. Now, it looks like he not only could do a lot of things with films, he also had the ability to be a poet. He had a natural talent to be a poet. Okay, and so if you want to say that he had a separate identity as a poet, that means people recognized him as a poet. He had an identity in the field of literature as a poet. And though he was certainly capable of more higher and complex forms, he deliberately chose to address his poetry to the masses. Now, one good thing about him was, although he wrote poetry, he didn't make it look too difficult for the common people to understand. He addressed it towards the common people. He did not try to be very showy, trying to show how well he understood Tamil and how he's able to compose beautiful poetry at the highest standards. He was very simple in that way. His success in films, maybe this is one of the reasons why he was successful in films, because he always addressed everything to the masses. But his success in films overshadowed and dwarfed his literary achievements. Meaning, he was so successful in films that his success in poetry was not noticed. Nobody even noticed it, right? Or so his critics felt. He composed several truly original story poems. How did he do? He composed several truly original story poems in folk refrain. Folk refrain means let's say, pattern, poetry pattern, okay, syntax, like a folk poem. And what is this diction? Diction is wordings. The wordings were very simple that common folk could understand, and the style was very folk poem style. And also uh, wrote a sprawling novel, wrote a very long novel, um, Tillana Mohanambal, with dozens of deftly etched characters. With a lot, dozens is not real, actually counting the number 12, dozens, because it's more than one dozen. It just means hundreds of, dozens of very deftly etched characters. Very deftly etched characters means very beautifully sculpted out characters. He made characters which were very detailed, right? And in a very, very big novel. He quite successfully recreated with that novel, he very quite successfully recreated the mood and manner of the Devadasis of the early 20th century. He was able to recreate how Devadasis were during the early 20th century. He was an amazing actor. Not that he could not act, he could act. He was an amazing actor. He never aspired for lead roles. He never tried to become the MJR or the Shivaji of that day or the Amitabh of that day. He didn't try, he never even wanted to become a lead actor. But whatever subsidiary role he did play smaller roles than the hero. Whatever smaller role, whatever character role that he played in any of the films, he performed better than the supposed main players. His performance is better than even the heroes or the main player, the main actors. He had a genuine love for anyone whom he came across in his house, and his house was a permanent residence for dozens of near and far relations and acquaintances. Now, he was a very affectionate person. He was very affectionate with everybody in the film industry, very affectionate with everybody. In those days, film industry meant Germany studios. Very affectionate with all friends or anybody who came and met him, who came and claimed and said that I am actually a distant relative, your father's, that's this, and all that. No, if they used to come to him, he was very kind to them. He was affectionate. Now, since he was affectionate, it seemed against Subbu's nature. There were a lot of people who were always at his home. Dozens of near and far relatives and acquaintances lived in his house. Why did they live in his house? It was against Subbu's nature to be even conscious, to be even aware, to show awareness that he was feeding and supporting so many of them. Such a charitable, such a generous and improvident man, okay? A giving man, person who gives. And yet he had enemies, even in spite of that. Even in spite of being so kind to so many people, he had enemies. Was it because he seemed so close and intimate with the boss? Maybe the reason is because he appeared very close to the boss, and the boss would do anything for him. That sort of a closeness. Or was it his general demeanor, or was it his attitude, the way he poses, the way he behaves? That's referred to as demeanor, that resembled a sycophant, that resembled a man pleaser. A psychopath is a man pleaser, one who pleases people all the time, tries to be very pleasing all the time, not really showing his true feelings for that person. Or his readiness to say nice things about everything, or is it because he was always ready to say nice things about everybody? We do not know. In any case, there was this man in the makeup department who would wish the direst things of Subbu. Whatever it is, there was this person who's standing right now in front of me as I'm talking to you about Subbu, this man's, this second most important character in Gemini Studio. His life, when I'm talking to you about him, there's this man, this office boy of the makeup department standing in front of me. He shows total animosity. He's very angry with him. He wants the worst thing to happen, the direst things to happen to Subbu. Okay. You saw Subbu always with the boss. If you want to know a little bit more about Subbu and the way he interacted with his boss, and who he is, if you want a little curious, let me explain. He says, you always saw Subbu with the boss. He's always with the boss. But in the attendance roles, though he was always with the boss, If you look at the register of employees, he was grouped under a department called the story department. Now, we've heard so long about the makeup department. This is the story department. And these are actually the poets, right? So the makeup department is called as a Pancakes. The story department is called as a um, poets. Okay, he was with the poets, comprising. Now, what does the department contain? The story department. Maybe it's the department which is responsible for generating stories for movies, comprising. But who all did it have? A lawyer and an assembly of writers and poets, and a group of writers and poets. The lawyer was also officially known as the legal advisor. Okay, he was called as a legal advisor, probably connected to the story, the copyright, and all those things. He was the one who discussed it, but extremely temperamental. The lawyer. This is another character connected with the story department. Okay, Subbu was one of the members of the story department. There was this lawyer. Um, but everybody referred to this legal advisor as not the person who gives good advice, as a person who gives advice that causes ruin. Everybody referred to him as the opposite. That means not advisor, somebody who causes uh, disrepute. Now he gives an example. An extremely talented actress. There was an extremely talented actress who was also extremely temperamental, as is usual among extremely talented artists. These people are very moody. You cannot predict what they will do next. That's the meaning of extremely temperamental. Once blew over on the sets. Blew over on the sets means erupted in anger, shouted, scolded, what do you call it? Threw a temper tantrum on the sets. That is during the shooting. On the sets refers to during the shooting. While everyone stood stunned, the lawyer quietly switched on the recording equipment. Now, if you look at the equipment that they had with the camera, there was a separate. It was the camera that also recorded the audio, right? And the audio is recorded as a kind of light strip, right? So he switched it on. When the actress paused for breath, when the actress, after a little amount, after the temper tantrum cooled down a little bit, just paused, maybe out of tiredness, the lawyer said to her, "1 minute, please," and he played back the recording, which everybody saw. There was nothing incriminating. There was nothing that would make her a criminal, that would go take her on the wrong side of the law. Is the meaning of incriminating, becoming a criminal, or unmentionably foul, or unmentionably or uh, unbelievably bad language about the actress's triad, about the actress's shouting against the producer. But when she heard her voice again through the sound equipment, she was struck dumb. She was shocked, right? A girl from the countryside, she hadn't gone through all the stages of worldly experience that generally precede a position of importance and sophistication. Now, since she was somebody who was very young, and she came into the film industry when she was very young. A lot of heroines come in when they were merely 13 or 14, and that is a very young age for a person to hold such an important position in the Gemini studios. She's a very important person because she's a heroine, right? Since she didn't pass through the developmental stages where she step by step takes on more responsibility and become more confident. Okay, uh, she became an easy prey to become upset. Worldly experience that generally precede a position, since she did not go through those stages of worldly experience that makes her hard and tough, that generally precede a position of importance, that come before, precede means come before a position of importance and sophistication, that she had found herself catapulted into. Now, since she was so young, it is not the time for her to come to such an important position, such a sophisticated position, but she was forced into it. She was thrown into it. She was suddenly jettisoned into a very high level, a status, since she was all of a sudden thrust into this position of seniority. she never quite recovered from the terror. She was not able to take the stress, the fear that was generated. She felt that day. That was the terror that she felt, the fear that the anxiety she felt that day. That was the end of a brief and brilliant acting career. So what happened? After that, she never came. She stopped acting. Okay. The legal advisor was also a member of the story department and unwittingly brought about that sad end. While every other member of the department wore a kind of uniform, which is khadi dhoti with a slightly oversized and clumsily tailored white khadi shirt, the legal advisor wore pants and a tie and sometimes a coat that looked like a coat of mail. Everybody in the story department, okay, um, looked very politically correct, right? In the sense that they looked as if they were thinkers. In those days, become looking like thinker is to wear very traditional khadi dress, okay, because British ruled at that time. Khadi dhoti with a slightly oversized and clumsily tailored white khadi shirt. Everybody was wearing that except legal advisor who wore pants and a tie, which was made him out to look as if he was westernized, and sometimes a coat. Because he was a lawyer, he sometimes wore a coat that looked like, and those cheap coats look very thick. Okay, so he's making fun of how thick it looked. It looked like a coat of mail. It looked like an armor, right? Coat of mail is a kind of inner garment to an armor that is made up of chains or chain like fabric. Often he looked alone and helpless, a man of cold logic. So, how did he look? In that group, he looked as if he had no friend. And why is it that even in the mind he was not in sync with them? Because he seemed to be a person who talked sense and logic in a crowd of dreamers, in a crowd of people who are very, imaginative. A neutral man, okay, a person who did not have any, let's say, affiliation to any theology or philosophy, in an assembly of Gandhiites, in a group of Gandhiites. Gandhiites means people who had Gandhian ideology, and Khadiites, and people who are very traditional, with traditional ideology. Like so many of those who were close to the boss, he was allowed. Now, this lawyer was allowed to produce a film, and though a lot of raw stock and pancake was used in it, not much came of the film. So, when you get very close to the boss gives you a chance to produce a film. Okay, he produced a film, and what happened was he used a lot of raw stock, meaning frills, things that like songs, like fights, like comedy, all these things. Raw stock is all those cheap things that add, let's say, entertainment, right? And pancake refers to makeup were used on it. Not much came of the film. That means it became a flop. Then one day the boss closed down the story department, and this was perhaps, so what happened? The boss became so angry that he closed down the story department. This was perhaps, and maybe this instance of closing is perhaps the only instance in all human history where a lawyer lost his job because the poets were asked to go home, right? A lawyer lost his job because the whole department was closed down. Gemini Studios was a favorite haunt. Now, going a little more into the poets department, was a favorite haunt, was a favorite visiting place. Haunt is a visiting place of poets like SDS Yoga here. Who is this? A freedom fighter. If you look at the box below, you'll see who he is: a freedom fighter and a national poet. And Sangu Subramaniam, Krishna Shastri. Sangu Subramaniam, then another person, Krishna Shastri, and Harindranath Chattopadhyaya. Now, this also was a playwright and a poet, right? All these great people of literature used to come and visit uh, Gemini Studios' story department. Why did they come to Gemini Studios? Because Gemini Studios had an excellent mess which supplies good coffee at all times of the day and for most part of the night. Now, it supplied good coffee at all times of the day and for most part of the night. Those were the days when Congress rule meant prohibition, and meeting over a cup of coffee was rather satisfying entertainment. In those days, it was not drinking that predominated, right? It was uh, coffee that predominated all kinds of friendly meetings. So why was that? Because during Congress rule, there was prohibition throughout the country. Meant prohibition, and in Tamil Nadu it was Congress rule. Meant prohibition, and meeting over a cup of coffee was rather satisfying entertainment. So that was the best that they could get, right? So they used to meet and talk. Barring the office boys, except for the office boys and a couple of clerks, everybody else at the studio radiated leisure. Radiated leisure means they seem to be free. They seem to be not busy at all, not having any work. Now, looks like this was something required, a prerequisite for poetry. Poetry means for the story department itself, for poetic composition, for creative work. Most of them wore khadi and worshipped Gandhi. But beyond that, they had not the faintest appreciation. So their ideology was connected with what they could show outwardly. They wore khadi. And what they could show outwardly also was support for Gandhi. Other than that, they had no idea of what Gandhian thought. They had no philosophy, not the faintest appreciation for political thought of any kind, not even the Congress political ideology. Naturally, they were all averse to the term communism. Now, since Gandhi and Gandhian thought was totally against communism, they were also against communism. A communist was a godless man in their imagination.